Let's talk about being restrained. One of the most common experiences of people with imposter syndrome is their feeling of being limited. They feel self-contained. They feel tied up. They feel prevented from stepping up, standing up, reaching up, speaking up, and they tend to shrink back. They tend to stay quiet. They tend to stay very inward. Now, it's kind of a paradox, because people with imposter syndrome are usually out there making things happen. They're the go-to people. They're the ones that have been promoted, been elevated, celebrated, revered, rewarded, awarded, and they're smart, successful, educated. They're on the surface. It seems like they really are making things happen, but inside they still have a measure of feeling stuck and feeling held back. So I call it being restrained. Now, back when I worked at NASA, in the propulsion systems lab, which is a jet engine test facility, you've probably heard me talk about it before. One of the pieces of test equipment that we needed in the engine test cell was called a containment shield. A containment shield, it was a shield. It was a metal shield. Imagine kind of a U-shape structure. Probably is made of metal, probably about 2 or 3 inches thick, maybe 1.5 feet deep, right? So imagine this shroud, and we would put it over the turbine part of the engine. The turbine was the most powerful part of the engine. Without going into all the thermodynamics and fluid mechanics of how a jet engine works, the power came from the turbine. Now, the turbine is spinning, as is the rest of the piece. The compressor is spinning, the turbine is spinning, the fan is spinning. If you have ever heard your washing machine when it's off balance as it's spinning, you hear the thunk, 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 right? And you can see the machine kind of wobbling. In fact, I remember I had my machine years and years ago. I had it on a little concrete pedestal. It just funked itself right off the pedestal. Well, that was interesting. But anyway, it funks, and most machines will shut down and stop, right? Imagine if you had a turbine and it is spinning at ridiculously high RPMs, like 50,000 RPMs. Just ridiculous. I mean, it's just a colossal number of RPMs, very high velocity, very high speed. And it goes off balance. It doesn't go funk, 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 and then stop. It kind of just goes kaboom. And in years past, in our propulsion systems lab, that actually happened. An engine went off balance, the turbine let loose, it exploded through the engine case, and then exploded through the wall of the test facility and scattered shrapnel all the way through the facility. Thankfully, nobody got hurt. Nobody was in that part of the facility. We were all in the control room, which we normally were during a test. But that accident dictated now every test would have this containment shield, this turbine containment shield. It wasn't meant to prevent the accident. It was meant to contain the damage, right? It's containment shield. Too many of us live as if we have a containment shield. We don't want our we're afraid that if we let our greatness out there, it's going to explode and damage and offend and send ripples and disturb and disrupt. So we keep it in. We fear shame. We fear judgment. We fear failure. So we're just going to keep it within our containment shield. Now, what's interesting, I want to draw a little bit of an analogy here. With jet engines, there were two types of failures. I mean, many types of failures, but two in particular that I want to focus on. One was an internal damage, internal failure that caused little external damage. It basically would, for example, a blade on the fan would get damaged or break off, and it would just kind of get sucked through the engine and churned up and spit up outside the back. Or a bird. You might have heard bird strikes, or birds getting sucked into an engine, or what's called FOD, foreign object damage. On the runway, if there's anything on the runway, on an aircraft carrier, if there's anything on the aircraft carrier surface, a screw, a piece of metal, it will get sucked into the engine. It will cause damage into the engine, but for the most part, the damage is minimized and is exhausted out the back end. That's one type of damage, internal damage that gets spit out the back end. It's kind of all linear. And then there's this explosive, destructive, uncontained event where the engine could be liberated, as we used to say, where the damage goes outward. It goes, the explosion goes outward. And that was the reason why we had the containment shield. Why am I telling you all this? People with imposter syndrome, we seem to live okay with that internal damage where we just kind of suck it up and live with it and kind of just let it go out. But we fear this external because we think it's going to be damage, and it's not. Now, when I say be uncontained, I'm not talking about spewing shrapnel everywhere. I'm not talking about getting your ugliness out there. I'm not talking about wreaking havoc or being mean or being critical or unreasonable or difficult to work with or obnoxious. I'm not talking about that. I'm not even talking about intentionally being a pest or going in and I'm just going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to give them a piece of what I got. I'm not talking about being destructive in any way. I'm talking about getting your greatness out there. I'm talking about being released so that your greatness gets all over everybody else. I'm talking about being so uncontained and unreleased so that you are free to just get your greatness all over everybody. You have a gift. You have extraordinary potential. You have wonderful creativity. You have ideas and perspective and talents and skills, and the world needs it. We need to stop living within this containment shield. We need to stop fearing that it's kind of this internal damage that was just going to go spitting out the back end. We need to live as if we are uncontained, as if that greatness gets out everywhere. I wrote about it in my book, my very first one that I wrote called You Are Hot. And I want to read you something that I wrote. What does this have to do with being accurately, I called it your self-quota, accurately assessing your worth? And I wrote, I don't mean that you need to explode or throw shrapnel everywhere. I also don't intend for you to be unrestrained or imply that you have unlimited freedom. Now, unlimited freedom is not always a good thing. Uncontainment isn't about freedom. It's about influence and affecting your world. We are not in the world to damage and destroy, but we are to build up and lift up. The analogy of the engine doesn't extend to its potential for damage, but it does extend to its purpose and plan, because you have a purpose in the world. When you are operating correctly and you are in the right place, you get your greatness out all over the place. You see, an engine with a containment shield around it is not a normal operating condition. It's a safety. I don't remember what I wrote here. I lost my place here. But it's not a normal piece of equipment. It doesn't go on the engine it doesn't go on the engine, on the airplane with the engine. The engine doesn't have a clunky shield around it. It does have a nearly impenetrable engine case, which is part of the aircraft's fuselage. But that's the way the engine is secured to the aircraft. A properly operating and installed engine does not need an extra contained shield. It is uncontained. See, the analogy there is that when you are operating correctly, when you are in your purpose, when you are truly convinced of your greatness and your contribution, you don't need to be living with this containment shield. You are operating as you are designed to operate, uncontained, yet in the right place. So in a way that is just so perfectly right for you. I hope this is making sense. I hope you understand the analogy. I just want you to think about getting your greatness out there, your influence, your ideas, your personality, your loveliness, your wonderfulness, your giftedness. Don't hold it back. Don't live underneath this containment shield. Live uncontained.